For this tutorial we will need these tools in front of us. We're going to use a tape measure, safety glasses, hearing protection, one pencil or pen, preferably a pencil in this scenario, a digital set of calipers to measure the thickness of our material, and a straight edge right here. The X-Carve CNC will be located within this wooden enclosure. If we open this all the way up, the door will rest on these pegs, and we have two lights to turn on in order to see our workspace. There and there. To power our X controller on, there is a power switch on the back bottom center of our box here. We now see a green light showing us that the power is on. Here's our green power light indicating that power is on. Here is the first light switch, and the second light switch would be on the opposite side of the top light. So back here is where the other light switch is, and then our power button is way down there. This button right there. After safely powering on the CNC, you have a blue USB cord on this Craig table here, which you can place your personal laptop or shop laptop. Make sure this is plugged in prior to setting up Easel. Once you've plugged your USB cord into your laptop, you can now begin the setup process. Before we begin using our CNC machine, we must first create an online account. So our machine brand is Inventables, and Easel is the web-based controller that we're going to use to upload our designs and operate our CNC. Give it some settings, tell it what bit to use, etc., etc. So I'd recommend using your student credentials when creating your free account. Once you do so, I'm going to log in here real quick so that I can show you what it looks like. So once you log in, create your account, you should get a page like this. We're going to then go New Project. The very first thing we're going to do is hit Machine and then click Drivers and Post Processors. We're going to download and install both of these. So we'll click this one and we'll click this one. You should get two downloads processing. Now that we have our two items downloaded, we can individually install them. And now we can click Return to Easel after downloading and installing these drivers, and we'll proceed with the initial setup of our CNC machine. So I'll open this untitled project, and then we will go through the rest of the steps here. And we now have to set up our new machine profile on our laptop. Now you could use your personal laptop, you could use the Makerspace shop laptop. If you end up using the shop laptop, this setup will already be done. But on your personal computer, this is how we're going to set up our machine for our laptop. So we're going to go to Machine, we're going to say Set up New Machine. We are going to select X-Carve pre-November. We're going to say motion controller is the X controller, Rail size is 1,000 by 1,000. Z-axis is the belt drive with Acme threaded rod. Spindle will be Makita. Belts will be 2GT. And we will uncheck dust shoe. Leave it unchecked. Press confirm. We'll hit new machine. Keep in mind the CNC machine needs to be plugged in and powered on when running this setup. Now, here is where Easel is asking us to jog our CNC machine. So whenever we manually move the CNC, it's considered jogging. So what this setup stage is asking us to do is if we click in these directions, the machine should travel in these directions. It's just confirming that the wiring is all set up correctly and your laptop is talking to the machine properly. So before we ever manually jog a CNC machine, it is extremely important that we visually check the work area of the CNC to make sure we're not going to crash the machine into any objects or obstacles in the way. So please triple check there's nothing in the way, the cutter isn't too low where it's going to scrape against the cutting floor before we move the machine. If there's nothing in the way, you can see we are well clear of anything in there. If need be, we could go up on the Z-axis, but if we click right, so X positive, the machine should travel to the right. So we can see that it is going to the right. If I click to the left, it should go to the left. And again, I made sure that I'm not also at the machine's limits. So if I was all the way in the back, I would not push the machine further in the Y positive direction because then it would just crash into the back of the enclosure. So now if I push Y negative, the machine should come towards the camera. And it does, and then Y positive should go in the opposite direction. Z negative should travel downward. Z positive should travel upward. So we can click yes for all of these. I'm going to move the machine a little closer to us too. And I'll click continue. I'm going to disable homing, and we do have a Z probe, so we're going to click yes. And now it's asking us to set up our Z probe. So to do so, the Z probe can be located on the blue Craig table just to the left of the CNC enclosure. This is what our Z probe looks like. It's got a black clip attached to a black wire, a black plug attached to both wires, and then a brass puck attached to the red wire. So on the back of this carriage is a little plug right back here. So we're going to take our black plug, plug that right into there. It'll sit kind of loose, so as long as it's attached, you're good. Let that hang over the carriage here. This black clip needs to go in from the front, not from the sides, but from the front. Clips onto the silver part of the spindle down here. I'll move the camera down a little bit so we can see what that looks like. So this is clipped on just down here, right in the front. And then the puck can sit right below the cutting tool, like such. And now the easel setup is asking us to attach the clip to the collet. We already did that, so we can say clip is attached. And now it says touch the touch plate to the collet. So when I touch that brass touch plate or that brass puck to the end of the cutter, this button here will show green and say contact. So that's showing you that there's an electric contact there, which is good. So now we'll rest that puck just below the cutter like such. We'll say continue, and then we can say back to easel. So we can now unplug and remove our Z probe. There's no specific order to this. I'll just unplug here, undo the clip, and we'll place this back on the blue table. Now, I'm going to open this untitled project. This is the new project we made. And this carve button, since we just set up our machine, should now show green, which shows that it's connected to our CNC. The last step of our setup, we're going to click Machine, General Settings, Machine Inspector. And if you need help with this, you can always consult a Makerspace employee. But we are going to input a few lines of code here to ensure that our machine travels the correct distance per click on the Z-axis. We're going to type $102 equals 50.059, enter, and it should show OK, so it accepted that. Now I'll type $112 equals 2000, $122 equals 100, $132 equals 149. And now you only have to do this once when you first set up the machine, and now forever, as long as you don't clear your whole laptop of all of its settings and information, all of this stuff will be saved. So our machine is now good to go. After we set those little code parameters, I'm going to click this jog menu here, so whenever you want to jog the machine again, this will access that. I'm going to press up on the Z axis. It'll probably travel downward once, but that's just because it's correcting for those codes we put in. So now if we push up again, the machine travels in the upward direction at a 0.1 inch increment. So now it is all correctly set up and ready to run. What we're going to do now is measure out our stock material in various ways. So the width of our material is about 16 3/8. So I'll write 16.375 is the width. The height is about 10 7/8. 10.875. And when we need to measure the thickness of our material, it is very, very important that we use a set of digital calipers. So, when you first open up your digital calipers, they'll probably be in a little black case like such. You open that up, here they are. It's very important you open them, wipe the little teeth clean with your fingers, close them all the way, and hit 0. That zeroes it out so it knows that this, when it's closed, is 0. Also make sure when you click mode, you want to be on inches, not millimeters. You can see it says inches on the right hand side here. So now we are good to go. We also want to make sure we're measuring from this thicker area of the teeth. I'm not going to use the very tips of the calipers because that measurement might be a little inaccurate. We're going to use this area in here. And we're going to measure 4 corners because plywood can have a varying thickness. So if I measure here, I get 0.265, and I'm squeezing the teeth here. I'm going to measure this corner now. I get 0.258. Measure this corner. I get 258. When I measure this corner, I get 2.266. So, my thickest point was 0.266. I'm going to write that down. And then I'm going to reference where my piece of wood has a bow. So if I look on the edge here, you can kind of see the material bows downward, right down that line. It's very slight. So I want the bottom of that slope, the bottom of the U of that curve, to be my bottom. And I'm going to mark everything on the top. I'll now grab the straight edge. And it's important that the stock material you choose has some simple dimensions to it. It's not like a weird circle or some oval with crazy cuts. It's easiest to start with a rectangular or square piece of stock material. It'll make your life a little easier for your project. So I'm just going to make an X using my straight edge, going from corner to corner, trying to get this as accurate as possible. So there's my X, that marks the center of my stock material. And then I'm going to grab my drill and I will pre-drill 4 holes, 1 in each corner. And we're just using a pretty standard 1/8 inch bit with a little countersink to give us a nice hole on all the corners. Leaves us with a nice hole like such on each corner. It's my dimensions and my center mark. And now our stock material is prepped and ready to be inserted into our CNC machine. To create our simple CNC file, we are going to utilize Adobe Illustrator, but you could use any vector creation program that you choose. You could use Inkscape, for example. That's a free version of Adobe Illustrator. You could also use any CAD programs such as Rhino, Fusion 360, AutoCAD. They all export the same file types that we'll need. In this case, it will be a .dxf file that we'll be exporting. So we're going to create a new file here. And in the case of Adobe Illustrator, we're going to be making our artboard the same size as our stock material. And our stock material is 16 3/8 by 10 7/8. Don't worry about resolution for pixels per inch or color or anything like that. And then we'll hit create. So here's our artboard that is the exact same size as our stock material. We're now going to draw a very simple shape for the sake of this tutorial. I'm going to grab the rectangle tool, I'm going to hold shift, and then I'm going to left click and hold to create my square. I'm going to make this 5.5 inches by 5.5 inches. So I'll press V on the keyboard, V for Victor. So I can go to my select tool, I can select my shape, and I'm going to ensure that it is an exact 5.5 inches. So I'll select that and type 5.5 and then press enter. Make sure this little lock is checked, the maintain width and height proportions. If it's unchecked, then you can basically skew your design. But we're going for a square, so we're going to say 5.5 and make sure this is checked when we scale that. I'm going to make this a little fancier. I'm going to add some curvature to my corners. And I'm going to drop in the OCC Makerspace logo so we can engrave that inside of our square here. There's that. I'm going to grab these elements and group them, just the logo here, and then with the logo selected I will center it or align it, and then same thing for my square shape, I will center and align that, And here is my very simple design. So the machine will basically cut this outline out of the material, and then it'll engrave these portions into the material. And we'll cover all those once we get to Easel. So now that we have our design made here, we're going to select our elements here. I'm going to go File, Export As, and we are going to select a .dxf file, and we're going to name this, let's go to Makerspace, DXF files, we're going to name this X-Carve CNC Tutorial V2, and we'll date it. Perfect. It'll give us some options here. Make sure our scale is set to 1:1 inches because that's how we designed it. And we will hit OK. And there we have our DXF file exported for our machine. I'm going to save this too so I have it. Alright, and now we can jump into Easel. Our next step is going to be inputting our CNC design, our DXF file, into the Easel workspace. So we're going to import that by clicking this little import button. Because our file is a DXF, we're going to select DXF import. We'll say upload file, and we're going to search for wherever we have that file. So I'm going to go to Makerspace, I just passed it, DXF, and X-Carve CNC tutorial, upload. I should see it pop up right here, there it is, and I will say import. So here's my file. I'm going to press Control A on my PC, that'd be a Command A on a Mac to select all. I can move my design wherever I like, and you see you have a nice little preview window here. So if I left click and hold, I can rotate around in this preview window. So it's always good to reference this preview once we have all of our settings input to make sure that the preview shows that the machine is cutting where we want it to cut and all of our design is looking like it should. It's also important that when we select our design here, again I'll press Control A, you can also just highlight everything. Once you select an object, you get this little window here where you can adjust size, position. You can also go into the Cut tab to change the cut settings. But first, double check that your dimensions are correct so that your design imported at the correct scale. So 5.5 inches by 5.5 inches is the correct scale of my design. I want to make sure this is set to proportionally scale as well, just in case. Now, what I'm going to do is set some cut parameters here so that this cuts accurately. So if I select this outline first, I'll then go to the Cut tab and I'll select Cut Outside Shape Path. And you can see there's a little preview to show you what these different operations do. Now, if I had left this on Cut On Shape Path, let's say we are using a 1/4 inch diameter cutter. The center of that 1/4 inch diameter cutter will travel on this blue highlight here down the center of this black line. And if we leave it like that, the machine will basically cut into our design. So if our full cutter diameter is a 1/4 inch, then half of that diameter will cut into our design. So basically our design will end up an 1/8 inch smaller than it should be because the cutter is traveling on this line. We want to change this to Cut Outside Shape Path. So now the very outside edge of the cutter will travel on the very outside edge of our design, leaving us with an exact, dimensionally correct cut. And then we're going to select this outer path here. I only want this to engrave an 1/8 inch, so I'll type 0.125. And you can see in this preview that it changed to show that that's cutting only an 1/8 inch deep. And I'm going to leave that cut on shape path because I want the cutter to travel on the center of that line. Then I'll select all of these elements. I'm going to hold shift to multiple objects here. And I'm going to say clear out a pocket. That way these all turn black so the machine only cuts inside. And I will also set that to 0.125. And you can see in the preview it's doing exactly as I asked it to. And in this case we're going to be using a 1/4 inch diameter cutter. So in order for this to be accurate, I'm going to change my bit here to 1/4 inch. There we go. You see the cutting area got a little wider because the tool is a little wider. And now my design is all set up with the correct cut paths. Now, as for the position of our design, the way we set this up in the OCC makerspace, it may be a little different if you have your own machines. We have a specific way of doing it in here. We're going to select our entire design. We're going to say shape, and then we're going to select this center origin point. So we're going to position this using coordinates based on the center of our whole entire design. So once I have everything selected and I have this center origin point clicked here, I'm going to say 0 for X and 0 for Y and then enter. So that puts the center of our design on this corner. Now it's going to look a little confusing in the preview here. Also it's going to look confusing here. The software, Easel, wants us to start everything from the machine's home, which is basically the bottom left corner of the cutting area. But we have students cutting various size materials, various size designs. Everything is always different. So in order to give us the most flexibility, we set the machine up this way so that we can position our material anywhere inside that cutting area that we like. And all we have to do is basically mark the center of our stock material, position our cutter over that area, and then the machine will cut our design wherever we position the cutter. So this is now all set up. I'm going to name this X-Carve CNC Tutorial V2 8/8/2024. It's always good to properly name all of your files, keep everything organized. So now that I have my stock material all prepped and measured out, I can input those settings in this little tab here. We are using plywood, so I'll leave the material as birch plywood, but you can change this to whatever you want depending on what you're cutting. Whatever material you select, it will then change the cut settings so that the machine travels at the right feed rate in order to not cut through your material too quickly or break the cutter, all those things. So for thickness, I'll input what we found. I'll go a little more than that. So we found that our thickest point was 0.266 inches. I'm going to round up a little and say 0.27 inches to make sure it cuts all the way through. And I'm only rounding up just a little, and I'll press enter. Now that I have that input, I want to make sure and double check that when I go into my cut settings for each area, so the cut is going all the way through 0.27, which is good. Now when you have areas that are cutting all the way through, it is extremely important that we use tabs. So these tabs are these yellow areas here. That's where the machine is going to leave a little bit of material the size of this yellow area. If we did not use tabs on a part that's cutting all the way out, what will happen is this piece, as soon as the machine cuts all the way through, this piece will just pop right out of the machine and bounce around. So that could either damage the part you're cutting or damage the machine and break the cutter. because there's a piece flying around getting stuck in areas that it shouldn't be getting stuck in. So we always use tabs. You can change the number of tabs here depending on the shape you're using. We're going to use 4 tabs to be safe here. I like to make my tab height 0.1, and then it's always important to position your tabs. You can just click and hold and move them around. You wouldn't want to put this tab on a rounded area or on a corner, because you need to remove these tabs later. And if it's in an area like this, it'll be a little harder to remove that and leave a clean finish. So I like putting my tabs on nice flat areas, which is where all these are currently positioned, so they look pretty good to me. And that looks perfect. Now I'll select these areas and make sure it's still 1/8 inch deep. That one's cutting on the shape path. These ones, I can right click and group all those. So if I select it all, it grabs it all at the same time. Those are going 1/8 inch and clearing out a pocket. So perfect. Everything is set up accordingly, and that's how we want it. Now to mount our material to our machine, I'm going to first jog the machine out of the way so I have room to mount this. So once I bring up my jog controls here, you can see we have interval. So it's basically how far the machine moves in inches per click. For the X and Y dimensions, we can put that at 1 inch, but we never put the Z at 1 inch. Never. Leave that at 0.1 or lower. So once the X and Y are at 1 inch, I'm going to move the machine in the Y positive direction, so away from the camera, to give me some room to mount our stock material. That looks like plenty right there. And now we can jump over to the machine and get all that installed. Alright, I have my stock material set up here. Now, I have 4 screws, 1 for each hole. It's important that you pick screws that are not too long. So you can see here, my screw goes through my stock and then not all the way through the wasteboard, but just to the base. You can see that there. You don't want to pick some crazy long screw that goes all the way down. That would just be way too long. So we're not going to use something too long. We're going to be using these shorter screws here. That way they don't go too far into our material. And I'm going to take my stock and butt it all the way up to the left against this edge. There's a little lip here. I butt my material up against this edge. That way my material is square with the machine. Once you get everything screwed down, it's very important that you double check to make sure that your material, your stock, is flush with the wasteboard. If there's a big gap between the bottom of your stock material and this wasteboard, then your material isn't perfectly flat, which will throw off the machine. So make sure these are all tight and screwed all the way down. You also, once you get everything mounted, you want to make sure you do a little earthquake test here. Make sure you can't move your material. If it doesn't move, then you know it's solid and ready to be cut on the CNC. Now that we have our stock material mounted to our CNC machine, we are going to manually jog our machine so that our cutting tool is centered on the pencil mark that we made on the center of our stock. So we'll open this jog menu. I'll put the X and Y at 1 inch increments, and I'm going to push Y negative to push the machine closer to our camera. Just going to get this close to our center. I'm I'll change my intervals to get finer movements now to get closer to my stock center. And I'm triple checking while moving this to make sure everything looks centered. I went too far there. There we go. That looks nice and centered on my mark. You can see our cutter head is nice and centered on our mark there. So now I'm going to move that back up on the Z to make room for our Z probe. I'm just going to double check everything is centered, so I'm going to grab all this, go to shape, everything's zeroed out, that looks good. Got my tabs installed, and then all my cut settings are correct. So I will now click carve. It's going to ask me to confirm a few things. So my thickness is correct, my material type. The material is secure. I did a little earthquake test to make sure that it's secure. We're using the 1/4 inch upcut bit. Now if you're ever curious what bit you're using, you can always consult a Makerspace employee to confirm what tool you're using. Also, before cutting, always make sure you ask a Makerspace employee to double check the tool is tight. Please have a Makerspace employee do so. Do not try to do this yourself. Double check this is tight on here. Good. And now we're going to use the probe. So I jogged the machine over our center, so that's correct. Now we can plug the lead in. So I'll take this plug back here and I'll plug that into there. The clip will go into the front of that silver collet, and the probe will go just below. Attach the clip, we already did that, so clip is attached. And now I'll touch the plate to the bit. And once I touch this plate or this puck to the bit, it should show green on the Easel software. There we go. And now I'll place the puck centered below our tool. Touch plate is in place, and then I'll say start probing. So you can see the CNC machine traveled by itself downward, touched the plate, and when it touched the plate, it traveled up a specific distance. So now the machine knows exactly where the top of our material is. So now we can disconnect all of our Z probe materials. So I will unplug this, unclip that, place this back on our table. The Z probe is put away. And here it wants us to go to the front left corner. We are not going to do that. We already positioned our X and Y on the center of our material on that pencil mark. So we'll just say set X and Y 0. On the left of our spindle, there is a power switch right here. So please make sure, this whole entire time you should have had your safety glasses on, but in this case especially, ensure your safety glasses are on. We're going to power this spindle on. The machine will start spinning, and then we will close the enclosure door to keep all of the dust and noise inside of our machine. So now we'll power on our spindle and close the door. Make sure you push the door all the way in. So now the door is closed, the spindle is on. We will say spindle is on, and then you click carve. Once our machine finishes cutting, it travels back to the center of where we set the X and Y 0, and then this page pops up. It says Carve Complete. So in order for us to get in there and vacuum and clean up, what we're going to do first is open the enclosure. We're going to manually turn off the spindle, and then we're going to jog our machine out of the way to give us room to vacuum, and we'll be good to go. Out of the way. And we can now vacuum up all of our dust. Now that we have our part all cut out on the CNC machine, we can remove our tabs here using a chisel located in the files and scrapers drawer in the tool room, and a hammer. And we want to put the chisel not on the part side but on the stock side so we don't break this off of your stock piece. Grab a little sanding block. Just sand those off. Here's our final piece.